Hey, so what is up guys? So welcome back to another video, and really today's video is really just about Apple. And the real question is it possible? Is it actually possible for Apple to make a computer that is thinner, lighter, and cheaper than buying a MacBook Air at the moment? And so, we're just going to talk about it a little bit. I have a couple of specs and a couple of information, to read about, and so let's get into it. And as always, you guys, there are skippable cards and chapters in the description and video notes, so you guys can skip around. We're not stopping you here. And so first, let's just get into it. And so the design of the computer. So Apple is expected to be going for a 13-inch design. Now, this is an interesting, benefactor, considering that we already have a 13-inch MacBook Air that is running an M4 processor. So it could possibly be a 13-inch design, but Apple has also been known for in the past to do the 2015 MacBook is what it was actually called. And the benefactor was the fact that it was super thin, only had one port to charge it and a headphone jack. And it was, it was all in one. It was fanless. And so that was a 12-inch computer. And so we could either see a 12-inch or a 13-inch. I totally think it would be awesome for Apple to revive the MacBook. And so the colors, as always, Apple normally goes for the fun colors with the cheaper models. And so for this one, we're expected to be getting a yellow, a blue, possibly a silver, and either a pink or a green. Again, Apple normally likes to choose the more cooler colors for the non-pro items, just because they know that, a mom or a dad is going to buy this for a kid, or, different factors like that. So for the processor, because the 2015 MacBook actually ran an Intel M processor, which supposedly is supposed to be efficient, but there's now a new difference because Apple Silicon processors are now ARM processors, which basically means that they actually generate more power more efficiently with less heat. The problem Apple had with Intel was the fact that they were definitely generating a lot more heat they were using a lot more heat, a lot more energy, power consumption. And so that's why Apple's been able to successfully make computers like the fanless MacBook M1, the MacBook Air M1. That's definitely the reason why Apple's been able to do it. And so ARM processors are actually found in smartphones today. The A series processor, the A10X, was definitely one of the first ARM processors that Apple has made that has generated enough power to run just like a computer. And so if you, jump back to 2025, Apple has the A18 Pro, which is an ARM processor that actually outperforms the M1 chip, which is Apple's first M series chip, but it also is in a smartphone. And so supposedly the reason why this computer is going to be cheaper is because Apple is going to obviously make it an ARM processor, meaning they won't have to put a fan in. The thermals will be maybe a little bit interesting to, see, but Apple's thermal technology has obviously gotten better with, the iPhone 16 Pro and the thermal paste, as well as that titanium build. We could see an aluminum build for this computer, but let's talk about the A18 Pro. Obviously, you guys probably know a little bit about it, but it's ran off of a 3-nanometer process, and I'll give you just some Geekbench scores of the actual device. So it has a 6-core CPU, which means that it has 2 efficiency cores and 4 performance cores, and it has a 6-core GPU. It is ran off of a 16-core neural engine processor that is based on AI, so it's definitely going to have Apple Intelligence if it actually ever makes the streets. The single-core performance is going to be 3,451. The multi-core is 8,572. And if you compare that to the M4 today, especially the M4 iPad Pro, it has a 3,694 single core and a 13,732 multi-core. So it's definitely a little bit slower on the single core side, but it's a lot slower if you're going to use it multi-core, which just means if you're going to run more enhanced, AI tasks or more editing and different things like that, you might want to possibly get an M4 Mac, because if you think about it, the M4 Mac has a 10-core CPU and a 8-core GPU for the base MacBook Air. And if you want to upgrade it, then you pay that extra $200 and you get a 10-core CPU and a 10-core GPU. So it's kind of really just whatever floats your boat. But Apple is definitely making a stance here of, could they make a cheaper computer with an A18 processor? And, it's definitely a possibility, especially with the ARM chips that we have today compared to x84 chips that we used to use with older Macs before 2020. And so that's definitely something interesting to talk about and something interesting to consider. So now for the RAM. So the current iPhone 16 Pro has 8 gigabytes of RAM. And see, 8 gigabytes is technically required and is the standard for Apple Intelligence. So at sub level, we could see this computer get 8 gigabytes of RAM. However, I wouldn't be surprised if it got 16 gigs of RAM, considering that 16 gigs of RAM is sort of the new standard for Macs. All Macs have 16 gigs of RAM now, and Apple, we'll just say, quietly updated the website whenever they were talking about Macs last year. They, quietly updated the website saying that the MacBook Air and, older Macs that they were selling would ship with 16 gigs of RAM. Definitely a bummer for those people who bought a computer with 8 gigs of RAM. But as always, again, Apple has very good RAM compression. And so I feel like if this computer ran with 8 gigs of RAM, obviously you're not going to be wanting to do like crazy video editing or, crazy tasks on this computer. You're kind of just going to want it for watching videos, surfing the web, maybe doing a little bit light editing if you like to, edit on your phone. I'm sure CapCut will actually, advance to this model, and they will, build in features to make it run better. But I definitely think that Apple's RAM compression system is very good, especially at the time, because the more RAM you have, the more RAM apps will use. Like on my current MacBook Pro, I have 24 gigs of RAM. If I open Safari, Apple Music, and Messages, Safari's using 14 gigs of RAM with 2 tabs open. iMessage is using 2 gigs of RAM, and then Music is probably using 2 gigs of RAM as well. So the more RAM you have, the more the Mac will try to utilize it so that it can run the processes more smoothly. It's really interesting how RAM compression actually works, but it's definitely something that Apple has gotten very good at, especially with the new Mac OS, that I definitely think that, with later versions of Mac OS, it can even get better. Now for the release date, we aren't necessarily totally sure. We definitely think that the release could be sometime around the, fourth quarter of 2025, because Apple, they just announced their September 9th event for the iPhone, but Apple could also do a short little computer event, or they could press release different products. And so we definitely think that this could show up in later 2025 of Q4, or possibly, quarter one of 2026, that being the spring event, which would honestly be perfect. Maybe we'll see an iPhone 17e at that event too. But it's definitely something to look forward to. I'm so excited to actually see what the possibilities are. And obviously for the price, because it is a cheaper Mac. And so you're going to say, oh, well, Eli, the iPad is $349. The iPad Air is $599. And so I definitely think that this could possibly cost around $699. It does make sense for it to be around the $599 and $699 price point, but we're not totally sure on the price. I think it's going to be $699. Give it a little bit of room from the current MacBook Air. But we'll see, time will tell. But if you guys enjoyed this video, definitely hit that thumbs up button, hit that like button. Let me know what you think about Apple doing this whole, cheaper MacBook. And, get subscribed because the Apple event is in about a week and a half, and I'm excited to write a whole video about it. And I'm definitely probably going to do a video before the actual event. If you're interested, click one of the videos that pop up on the screen. We do tech videos, and clicking that video definitely tells the algorithm that my stuff doesn't suck. But until the next one, guys, hit that sub button, hit that like button, check out the socials, and I'll see you guys around. So yeah, peace.